Hi, it's Jamie from Guildbrook Farm, where we take you along on our journey to become more self-reliant, and we are learning about herbals. And today we're going to take you along as we make an herbal cough syrup. So it's the end of September here. We are getting into cold and flu season, and one symptom that just about everybody in the family gets as we get into fall and winter is some sort of cough. Now these coughs can range anywhere from a dry, hoarse cough to a wet, productive cough. Now the reason that the body is coughing is usually to expel some sort of phlegm from the chest or from the lungs, and it's really important that we don't suppress that completely, because that is one way of the body getting rid of all that gunk. And by suppressing that completely, what you're doing is basically creating a scenario where you could potentially get pneumonia. However, as many of you know, when you have some sort of cough, sometimes you just get that irritating cough where you get a sore throat or you just can't stop coughing, and that's where this cough syrup is going to come in handy. Now there are 3 herbs that we are going to use to help with the cough itself. The first one is wild cherry bark. This is going to be for suppressing the cough reflex in itself. Licorice root. Now licorice root is an expectorant, so it's going to help get all that gunk out of the lungs, but it's also an anti-spasmodic, so it's going to stop you from getting that irritating cough you can't get rid of. And then we have mullein, which is traditionally used for both dry barking coughs and also for wet productive coughs. So the recipe that we are modeling our cough syrup after is found in Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs. I'm going to leave the links down below to all of the references that we use for learning about herbals. And her recipe calls for licorice root, mullein leaf, and cherry bark, as well as honey or a sweetener, which we are going to use here. But in addition to these 3 ingredients, we are going to also add in valerian root. Now the reason I'm adding in valerian root is typically when somebody in our house gets a cough, it's really hard for them to fall asleep, and valerian is really good as a sleep aid. And in addition to that, it is also an anti-spasmodic. So giving this along with the other cough herbs is going to help you get a little bit of rest at night. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start making our recipe. And what we are going to do is take 3 cups of water. And we're going to bring this to a simmer. And we're going to add 2 tablespoons of each one of our herbs to the pot. And we're just going to stir that into the water. What we are making here is an herbal decoction. So what we want to do is make sure that our heat is on low, but it's high enough to come to a simmer. And then once it comes to a simmer, we're going to put our lid on part of the way and reduce this down to half the volume. It's been about an hour, and our decoction has decocted down to about half. That's what we want. We want it to be pretty strong. And now we're just going to strain this into another glass. And we're going to press that out. And this is going in the compost pile. All right, now that we have our decoction and all of our herbs are strained out, we need to add our sweetener. You can use either honey or vegetable glycerin or brown sugar, whatever you want to use. We're gonna go with honey because that has antiviral and antibacterial properties to it. It's actually the only thing that I used to give my kids for coughs ever since they were 1 year old. So we are going to add that to our decoction. Now, traditional recipes call for a 1-to-1 ratio. That is usually for preservation properties, but you can use a little bit less if you like. We're just going to measure out until we get to about a cup. So I have about 3/4 cup of decoction here, and I'm going to add honey until it gets to about a cup. Now that we measured that out, I'm going to just add it back to my pot. My pot has been cleaned out. And we are going to turn our stove on very low and just allow the honey to dissolve. You don't want to turn this up too high because this particular honey is raw and I don't want to denature it by heating it up too high. So just enough to allow the honey to dissolve. All right, our honey's dissolved. Now we're just going to allow this to cool before we pour it into our container. Now I have a plastic blue, cobalt blue container here that I got from the health food store. I think this was only like $1.50, but we're going to use this to store our cough syrup in. So we'll be back in a few minutes as soon as this cools down. All right, it's been about 10 minutes and our syrup has cooled down. I'm just going to pour it back into this measuring cup, just to, because this has a spout on it, and we are going to pour it into our container. There you go, and that just about filled up the container. Now, if you want, as an option, you can add some brandy, or you can add a drop or two of peppermint oil to the syrup just to kind of give it some flavor or to help relax the throat a little bit more. We're just going to leave it as is and cap it, and we're going to put it in the fridge where it's going to last for several weeks. Now the dosage for the cough syrup is going to be 1/2 to 1 teaspoon every half hour as needed. Now because this only lasts a couple weeks in the fridge, probably about 2 to 3 weeks, you're probably going to want to make this at the onset of symptoms. And it really only takes about an hour and 15 minutes to make. So having these ingredients on hand is going to be useful for cough season coming up. Now just keep in mind that cough syrup is only addressing the symptoms. We did do a video on cold and flu pills that does have echinacea in it, which helps to offset the actual cold itself. So that if you're interested in something like that, you might want to look into it. Now just as a reminder, we are taking you guys along with us as we are learning about herbals. I am not an herbalist or a naturopath, so you are going to want to check with your doctor and do your own research before you decide to take any herbals yourself. I do recommend that you look up any herbs that you are going to use and make sure you check to see if they interact with anything else that you might possibly be taking. In particular with this recipe, licorice root does have some sort of adverse reaction if you take far too much of it. Now if you're just taking this in a cough syrup, no problem at all. It shouldn't be any problem at all, but in high doses that can cause an adverse reaction. So make sure you do your research on any herbals that you take. If you guys like this kind of stuff, we are going to be doing a lot more herbals coming up, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, if you guys are doing herbals yourself and you have any recommendations for a cough syrup, leave it down below. I want to hear from you guys. If you have any questions, we'll try and answer it as best as we can. Yeah, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.